Before you decide who deserves what, make sure the person you're dividing things for is already gone, because my family forgot that part. I was 71 years old when I found out my children had already planned my inheritance, not after my death, during my life. My name is Ruth, and this is the story of how love quietly turned into entitlement. For most of my life, I believed family meant safety. I believed that if you worked hard, raised your children well, and stayed out of trouble, the people closest to you would protect you. That belief lasted until the afternoon I overheard my own children discussing my house like I was furniture. It happened accidentally. I had come home early from a doctor's appointment. Nothing serious, just one of those routine checkups that become more frequent as you age. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. I heard voices in the living room, familiar ones. My daughter, Elaine, my son, Robert. They didn't hear me. I stood still, keys still in my hand, listening. "I think we should sell it as soon as Mom, well, you know," Robert said. Elaine sighed. "She won't need it forever." There was no malice in their voices. That made it worse. They were speaking casually, practically, as if my absence was already scheduled. I didn't interrupt them. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me wanted to hear how far they would go. They talked about repairs, market value, who would take what. Robert mentioned my savings. Elaine mentioned my jewelry. They spoke in percentages. I felt my legs weaken, not because I was ill, because I was invisible. I walked out quietly, closed the door behind me, and sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes. I didn't cry. I felt something colder than sadness. Recognition. I realized then that my children had stopped seeing me as a person. I had become a future event. That night, I cooked dinner like nothing had happened. I listened as Elaine talked about her job. I asked Robert about his kids. They didn't notice anything different. Why would they? I had spent decades making sure they never felt uncomfortable. But that night, after they left, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I had never done before. I reviewed my finances, carefully, line by line. The house was paid off, the savings were modest but stable, everything was in my name, for now. I found my will in the bottom drawer of my desk, outdated. Written years ago, back when I believed love guaranteed fairness. I slept poorly that night, not because I was afraid of dying, because I was afraid of disappearing before I did. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes. Elaine began calling more often, not to ask how I was feeling, to ask questions. Had I thought about assisted living? Did I still need such a big house? Had I considered simplifying things for later? Robert sent articles about estate planning. He framed them as concern. I recognized the pattern. They weren't preparing for my death. They were preparing for convenience. I began answering carefully, vaguely. I did not confront them. Not yet. I wanted to understand. One afternoon, Elaine showed up with paperwork. She said it was just information, power of attorney forms, health care directives. I thanked her and said I would look at them. She looked disappointed. That expression stayed with me long after she left. I realized then that what my children wanted was not protection, it was permission, permission to move ahead without me. I decided to speak to someone who had no emotional investment in my choices, a lawyer. The appointment was sobering. He listened quietly as I explained what I had overheard. Then he asked a question that changed everything. Do you trust your children to act in your best interest if they have legal authority? I hesitated. That hesitation was my answer. The lawyer explained my options: trusts, safeguards, boundaries. He did not tell me what to do. He told me what could happen if I did nothing. That night, I sat alone and thought about the woman I had been my entire life: accommodating, reasonable, quiet. Those qualities had raised children. They had also trained them. I wasn't angry. I was awake. I began making changes, slowly, quietly. I updated my will. I created a trust. I appointed an independent executor, not a family member. I didn't tell Elaine or Robert. I wanted to see what they would do next. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Elaine suggested a family meeting. She said it was important. I agreed. When they sat across from me at my dining table, they looked nervous, prepared. Elaine spoke first. "Mom, we just want to make sure everything is clear for the future." Robert nodded. I smiled. "The future is unclear by nature," I said. They laughed politely. Elaine slid a document toward me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I asked a question. "Why are you both so interested in what happens after I'm gone when I'm still very much here?" I asked calmly. The room went silent. They looked at each other, then back at me. Robert spoke carefully. "We're just being practical." I nodded. "So am I." That was the moment they realized something had shifted. They just didn't know how far yet, and neither did I. But one thing was clear. I was no longer willing to be discussed as an absence. I was present, and I intended to stay that way. The days after that meeting felt strangely calm. Too calm. Elaine and Robert didn't call as often. When they did, their voices were measured, careful, as if every word was being tested before it was spoken. That told me everything I needed to know. They were adjusting. People don't usually change their intentions, they change their strategies. I continued my routines as usual: morning walks, grocery shopping, quiet afternoons with the radio playing softly in the background. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. I paid closer attention to how my children spoke to me now. Elaine asked questions in the form of suggestions. Robert framed demands as jokes. "Don't forget us when you make your plans," he laughed once. I smiled politely, but I didn't forget that he said when, not if. One afternoon, I received an email from a financial advisor I didn't recognize. The message was brief. "Elaine mentioned you might be interested in reviewing your assets and long-term planning options." I stared at the screen for a long moment. She had not mentioned any such thing to me. I replied simply, "I am not interested. Please remove my name from your records." Within minutes, Elaine called. Her tone was defensive. "I was just exploring options," she said. "I thought it would help." "Help whom?" I asked. She sighed. "You're being difficult." There it was again, that word people use when they feel entitled to your compliance. "I'm being deliberate," I replied. The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was sharper. "We're just trying to avoid problems later." I took a breath. "Later belongs to the future," I said. "Right now belongs to me." She ended the call abruptly. That evening, I sat at my desk and reviewed the documents my lawyer had prepared. Everything was clear, structured, protected. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. That peace didn't last long. A week later, Robert showed up unannounced. He stood in my doorway, hands in his pockets, forcing a smile. "I was in the area," he said. He wasn't. He lived 2 hours away. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked through the house slowly, looking around in a way that made my skin tighten, evaluating. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't waste time. "Elaine says you've been shutting us out," he said. "I've been setting boundaries," I replied. He leaned forward. "You're overthinking this." I looked at him calmly. "No," I said, "you're underestimating me." That caught him off guard. He tried another approach. "You know we'd never hurt you," he said. "We're family." Family. That word had always worked before. I folded my hands on the table. "Then why are you making plans without me?" I asked. He looked away. Silence filled the room. Then he said something that confirmed every fear I had tried to ignore. "We just don't want things to get complicated." I nodded slowly. "What you mean," I said, "is that you don't want me to complicate things." He didn't deny it. That was the moment I understood the full picture. My children weren't malicious. They were impatient. They saw my life as something winding down, and they wanted it organized to suit them. I stood up. "I think it's time you go," I said gently. Robert stared at me. "Are you kicking me out?" "I'm ending this conversation," I replied. He left angry. The pressure intensified after that. Elaine began telling extended family members that I was confused, that I was being stubborn, that she was worried about my decisions. I heard about it through a cousin. That hurt more than anything else, not because it was cruel, because it was calculated. I realized then that silence was no longer protection. I needed witnesses. I began documenting everything: dates, calls, emails, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I also started speaking more openly to neighbors, to friends, to people who had known me for years. I told them calmly what was happening, without drama, without accusation, just facts. The response surprised me. People listened. They believed me. Some shared similar stories. Parents sidelined, assets discussed prematurely, control disguised as care. I wasn't alone. One evening, Elaine called again. Her voice was tired. "Why are you doing this? Why are you making us look bad?" I paused before answering. "I'm not making you look like anything," I said. "I'm just refusing to disappear quietly." She cried. This time I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. "I raised you to be independent. That lesson didn't end when I got older." She hung up without saying goodbye. Days passed, then weeks. The house felt different now, lighter. I began sorting through belongings I had kept for decades, not to give them away, to let go. I donated items, gave away furniture. I wasn't preparing to die. I was preparing to live differently. And then the final confrontation arrived. Elaine requested another meeting. She said it was important. I agreed, but with conditions. We met at my lawyer's office, neutral ground. When Elaine and Robert walked in and saw where we were, their expressions changed. Fear replaced confidence. My lawyer greeted them politely and explained his role. Elaine spoke first. She accused me of mistrust, of overreaction, of letting strangers influence me. I listened. When she finished, my lawyer spoke. He outlined my legal decisions: the trust, the executor, the protections. Robert interrupted. "You can't do this." My lawyer looked at him calmly. "She already has." The room went silent. Elaine turned to me. "You chose money over family," she said. I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I chose myself." That was the breaking point. They left without another word. I sat quietly as the door closed behind them. I didn't feel victory. I felt grief, not for what I lost, but for what I had misunderstood for so long. I had believed love meant surrender. I was wrong. Love that requires your disappearance is not love, it is convenience. That night I slept better than I had in months, not because things were resolved, but because I had finally told the truth to them and to myself. After that meeting, my house felt quieter than it ever had before. Not empty, clear. For the first time since I overheard my children speaking about my life as if it were already finished, I felt grounded in something solid. Choice. Elaine and Robert did not contact me for several weeks. At first, I wondered if that silence was punishment. Then I understood it was recalculation. People who expect entitlement often pause when it disappears. I spent those weeks doing something I had neglected for years. Living deliberately. I took longer walks. I joined a small book club at the local library. I cooked meals I enjoyed instead of meals that were convenient. I was not distracting myself. I was reclaiming time. One afternoon, my lawyer called. He informed me that Elaine had contacted his office requesting information about the trust. He declined as instructed. She sounded upset, he said carefully. I thanked him. Upset was not an emergency. That evening, I sat down and wrote letters, not to my children, to myself. I wrote down what I wanted the rest of my life to feel like, not look like, feel like. Quiet, autonomous, honest. I realized then that the inheritance was no longer the center of this conflict. Control was. Money was simply the language it used. Weeks later, I received a certified letter. Elaine and Robert were challenging my mental capacity. They claimed concern. They claimed confusion. They requested a formal evaluation. I read the letter twice. My hands did not shake. This was the line, the moment where care fully revealed itself as strategy. I contacted my lawyer immediately. He was not surprised. Unfortunately, this happens more often than people admit, he said. We scheduled the evaluation, not because I was required to, because I wanted transparency. The evaluation was thorough. Questions about dates, decisions, finances. I answered calmly, confidently. At the end, the physician smiled kindly. You're perfectly competent, she said, more so than many people half your age. The report was sent. The challenge dissolved. Elaine did not apologize. Robert did not explain. Instead, I received a message from Robert weeks later. I didn't think it would go this far. I stared at the words. Neither did I, but that did not absolve him. I began to understand something essential. Intent does not erase impact. That realization allowed me to stop seeking understanding from them. I no longer needed it. What I needed was alignment with myself. And then I made the decision that surprised everyone, including me. I revised the trust again, not to punish, to redefine legacy. I allocated a significant portion of my estate to a community foundation, education grants, senior advocacy, legal aid for the elderly, causes that protected people who did not have families willing to protect them. Elaine and Robert would still receive something, but not control, not leverage. I did not inform them. Legacy is not a negotiation. When Elaine found out through extended family, she called immediately. Her voice was sharp. You're giving our inheritance away, she said. I corrected her. I'm deciding where my life's work goes. There was a long pause. Then she said something I will never forget. You owe us. I closed my eyes. No, I said. I raised you. That was the gift. She hung up. That night I cried, not of regret, out of mourning. I mourned the version of family I thought I had. But grief, I learned, is not a signal to undue clarity. It is simply the cost of seeing clearly. Months passed. The tension faded into distance. I received occasional updates through relatives. Elaine was angry. Robert was quiet. Neither reached out directly. I focused on what remained. my health, my friendships, my days. One afternoon, I stood in my garden and realized something profound. I was not afraid anymore, not of being alone, not of being judged, not of being misunderstood. Fear had been replaced by peace, and peace, I discovered, is far more powerful than approval. I was no longer living for a future others had planned. I was living inside the present I chose, and that changed everything. The months that followed were quieter than any season of my life before. Not empty, intentional. I stopped waiting for my phone to ring, stopped rehearsing conversations that never came, stopped hoping for apologies dressed up as understanding. I learned something important in that silence. Peace does not arrive when others finally agree with you. It arrives when you stop needing them to. Elaine never challenged the trust again. Robert sent one message months later. I hope you're doing well. I read it once, then I replied with the truth. I am. That was enough. I continued working with the Community Foundation quietly, no announcements, no recognition. I met people who had been forgotten by their families long before they were forgotten by systems. Elderly neighbors pressured into signing documents they didn't understand. Widows convinced they were confused when they disagreed. Parents treated as obstacles instead of people. Their stories were different. The pattern was not. And for the first time, I understood the full weight of my choice. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what you refuse to allow while you are still here. I wasn't giving money away. I was interrupting a cycle. On my 75th birthday, I received a card from Elaine. No letter, no explanation, just a card. It said, "Happy birthday." I placed it on the shelf and went about my day. There was no anger in me, only distance. Distance can be an act of care when closeness has become harmful. That evening, I sat on my porch and watched the light fade from the sky. I thought about the woman I had been when this began, afraid of conflict, afraid of disappointing others, afraid that standing firm meant standing alone. She had been wrong. Standing firm had brought me closer to myself than I had ever been. I did not lose my children. I lost the illusion that love requires surrender. I learned that being alive does not mean being available for erasure, and that inheritance is not something others are entitled to simply because they are waiting. My life did not end when my children divided it in their minds. It began again when I took it back. If there is one thing I know now, it is this. You are allowed to be present in your own life. You are allowed to decide. You are allowed to protect what you built, even from the people who believe it already belongs to them, especially from them.